Let's talk a little bit more about AI, because I do think that regardless of the near term and longer term implications, there is a peaking of fear, peaking of interest, both different spelling of the word peak. Adam Schiff yesterday proposed a bill, earlier this week, called the Generative AI Copyright Disclosure Act, in response to, I think, over 100 musicians signing a letter saying they're concerned that their copyrighted works are being used to train AI models. And Nick, if you'll pull up the text from the bill that I pulled out here real quick, we can take just a quick look. It's a very short bill. It's only 5 pages long, and it defines a generative AI model that's a combination of computer code and numerical values designed to use artificial intelligence to generate outputs in the form of text, images, audio, or video, and that it substantially incorporates one or more models as a system, and it's designed for use by consumers. And what the bill then asks is that anyone developing these models has to submit to a register run by the federal government a list of all of the data that they used that might be copyrighted to train the model. And that this becomes a precursor to being able to legally develop and use AI models, that you actually have to register the training data. So I have a rant on this, which I'm going to preserve for the end, given my rights as moderator here today. But I'd love the reaction from Sachs first on Schiff's proposed bill, Chamath, and we'll run this one around the horn pretty quick.
Well, first of all, I think it's too soon for this legislation. I mean, the first thing that needs to happen is we need to get the question of fair use arbitrated by the courts. We've talked about this before. People publish lots of information on the internet, and I guess technically it's copyrighted, but it's been published in a completely public way. And humans are obviously allowed to read it and use it to generate their own work. I think there's a question about whether AIs are allowed to learn from it as well. And I would argue that they should be, to some degree, under fair use. Maybe if you're talking about copyrighted songs, I don't know if that's different. Anyway, these questions need to be arbitrated. And once we know that, then we'll know whether there's a need for a rights clearinghouse of some kind, which may not be a bad idea. I actually got pitched by a founder recently to create a rights marketplace with copyright holders on the one side, or rights holders, could be musicians, could be movie studios, could be anyone who owns content, and then AI companies on the other that want to license that content for training purposes. And I actually thought it was a pretty good idea. So my point is just that there are entrepreneurs working on solving this problem as well. And I guess what I'm saying is I'd like to see fair use figured out, and I'd like to see what the private solutions are going to be before we try to legislate this problem away from really a point of ignorance, because we're so early in the development of this market. Now, I think one of the questions you have to ask here is, why did Adam Schiff introduce this bill? And who is Adam Schiff? Adam Schiff is a powerful California congressman who is the candidate for U.S. Senate right now, and he's expected to win. He's ahead of Steve Garvey, who's the Republican candidate, by like 30 points. Schiff is, in addition to being a vicious partisan who's known for Russiagate, he also is a prodigious fundraiser. And when he's not in front of the cameras, he's very effective in closed doors, appealing to the key special interests in California that matter. And my guess is that he's not carrying water here for the 100 musicians who signed that letter. He's carrying water for the big studios, the big Hollywood studios, including music labels, but also the movie studios. And
he's an LA-based congressman.
Yeah, I mean, that's who he's representing. Now, at the same time, my guess is that he's run this by the big tech companies, and he's probably got their blessing to some degree, because like Bill Gurley always points out, they like rules like this because of regulatory capture. They can comply with them, but the little guy, the entrepreneur who's trying to create something new, has a much harder time complying with these regulations. So this is basically a big special interest group sort of deal that I think he's putting forward.
Do you think this becomes law?
Not yet, but it's paving the way for something.
And it's more like his promotional effort during his campaign, effectively.
Well, I mean, he'll
still try and move it legislatively, but
yeah, I mean the big LA powers that be like this, and
they love this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Chamath? Any reaction to this bill?
I think there was an article in The Verge that I posted. It turns out that OpenAI transcribed over 1 million hours of YouTube videos to train GPT-4. My takeaway when I read this was, well, if Google's not going to sue OpenAI, then this is a moot point. Because you're talking about one of the most valuable companies in the world with one of the most valuable sources of training data in the world. And so if it's true that there was a copyright violation and Google just lets this go, what's anybody else supposed to do? What chance does these group of singer-songwriters have? And, no offense to Adam Schiff, but he's not going to be able to do anything. So if this multi-trillion-dollar company doesn't draw a line in the sand, then none of this matters and everybody's going to train on everything.
Mm-hmm. I think my big takeaway on all this is that there's a real deep misunderstanding on what these models really are and what they're doing. The assumption, I think, naively, is that they take in a bunch of data and then they spit that data back out. And in some cases, maybe slightly transformed. But the truth is that the models don't actually hold the data that they're trained on. They develop a bunch of synthesized predictors that they learn what the prediction could or should be from the data. And this is similar to how humans operate. Can you pull up the article, Nick, that I posted? This article is from last May, and you guys may remember this case. I can't remember if we talked about it on the show, but Ed Sheeran was sued by the estate of the writer of the Marvin Gaye song, Let's Get It On, for infringement in his song, Thinking Out Loud. And he actually prevailed in court, where he went through with the jury how he runs his creative process, how he came up with the song, and how he does his work. And as you know, Ed Sheeran and nearly every musician or every artist listens to other people's music, looks at other people's art, and they synthesize that data. They synthesize that knowledge and that experience into their own creative process to output what, in their mind, is a novel creation. And I think that AI works in a similar vein in that it's not actually storing the images, it's not actually storing the music of third parties. It's learning from that process. We all, like musicians, learn on classical music. They listen to and play other pop artists' music. And then they learn things that they like, things that they don't like, things that fit together well, certain intonations, syncopations, and that's how they develop their own tracks. And so I think that the assumption in AI is that it's almost guilty until proven innocent is what's going to really challenge this technology getting mainstay appeal and being useful in the way that it could and should be. That the de facto is that it's learning and training is copyright infringement.
I don't buy that.
You don't buy that?
No.
That it stores the data?
No, that just because you're learning like a human, it's not copyright infringement. And
I'm sorry, let me make my last statement, which is that I do think that similarity is measurable, and that is copyright infringement. So I would, rather than focus on how you train the model, I would encourage legislators to find, as Sachs points out, a better process to define what makes one thing distinct from another, run that analysis, and then use that analysis to determine uniqueness. And that analysis is ultimately what should determine whether there is copyright infringement versus the how was the model trained exercise, which is wrought with challenges, as you guys know. How do you determine weightings? How do you determine whether this was even relevant in the model? We don't even know if the models ignore the data or use the data in their synthesis or in their weightings. It's all very opaque. And so it's almost like, hey, here's a list of stuff that I read, but I may not have even paid attention to 95% of it when I was reading it. We don't know. And so I'd rather focus on, is there copyright infringement in the output? Does the output mimic an original copyrighted source? And if it does, then that's where the infringement should lie, not on the how did you do it.
I think that you're creating an impossible standard. Is it 5% the same? Is it 8% the same? Is that 14%? Where's your threshold? Is it 78%?
How's that different than training? How's that different than training? If I'm J.K. Rowling, am I not allowed to read other authors' copyrighted books for fear that by reading it, I will now use their copyrighted material in my novel book?
No, okay, stick with that example, but we can also use the Ed Sheeran example. Nick, can you play this video?
I could play you every song in the pop charts right now over 4 chords. You name any song and I'll play it in the 4 chords. So these are the chords.
FCG and X.
Passenger, that's your friend.
Cause you only need the light when it's burning low. Only miss the sun when it starts to snow. Only know you love her when you let her go.
Let it be.
I'm walking away, Craig David.
Greg David.
I'm walking away from the troubles in my life.
Last one, Let It Be, Beatles.
When I find myself in times of trouble, brother man, I'm telling you.
Why is that important? Obviously, it's not illegal for Ed to have learned these 4 chords, but if he tries to produce those songs and calls them something else, that's clearly somebody else's IP. Similarly, I think that if you don't give people the right to say, yeah, of course, the letters A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all the way to Z are not my invention. It's the alphabet. I don't control that. I don't control words and their meanings. But when I put one word in front of another purposefully, and I create something that has value to me, I should have the right to protect that. And I think that's the fundamental question. Should you not have a right to protect it? Should you allow somebody else to take that and in some opaque way, an undefinable way, make a system that could compete with that thing and have no repercussions? I think that that's what people need to decide. And I'm fine, by the way, one way or the other.
Yeah. In the Ed Sheeran case, he was saying the exact copyrighted lyrics and he was singing the exact copyrighted melody. He was just playing the harmony with 4 chords. I mean, that was kind of the point he was making. And in the case of all the copyrighted material you're stating, I want to protect it from showing up in the end product of someone's creative process. I shouldn't care about them listening to my song in their creative process. Everyone always references how Oasis sounds like the Beatles, right? Those guys love the Beatles. They listen to the Beatles. So much of their music mimics and sounds like the Beatles, but the Beatles aren't going to file infringement suits against them. They were inspired by the Beatles. That was part of their creative process. And so I would argue that the output should really be where we assess this stuff. And it's going to take a lot of cases.
You're creating an impossible standard where any individual person will have the economic wherewithal to fight this. And so it's basically ceding all creativity to the Borg. And I don't think
what is the standard of measuring how someone is training their creative process? Your standard is I got to go.
I don't think this.
I got to go listen. I got to go. You got to tell me every time you, as an artist, listen to a song, and then I'm going to determine whether or not you are listening to copyright music and making your own music. That's basically what we're asking for here with this bill.
That's not what I'm not talking about the bill. I'm talking about this idea that if you train a system that can actually automate a task for you, based on some learning that's unique, you should be able to uniquely protect your ownership. For example, we have a different set of ways in order to protect processes that are unique to you, which is you can have a patent or you can have a trade secret. But if you strip all of this stuff away where some system can, in an automated way, do anything for you and replicate a whole bunch of work that it sits on top of to be able to do that without any repercussions, I think that that's a very important explicit decision. And what I'm saying is you cannot expect individual people to go and fight these little battles against these big multi-$100 billion companies. If the big multi-$100 billion companies and trillion-dollar companies don't fight the other multi-$100 billion and trillion-dollar companies, what they're effectively saying is none of this is worth anything. Copyrights are worth nothing. And I'm okay with that decision, but it should be an explicit one. And it's not going to happen the other way where some 5-page law from a guy who's trying to get elected is not the thing that's going to make the difference. The difference is if Google doesn't sue OpenAI, it means copyright is worthless. And by the way, that article didn't just point the finger at Google. It pointed the finger at Meta, where there were explicit decisions to say, yeah, no, let's just violate the copyright. It's okay. And if it's okay, then it's okay.
Sachs, you're the independent arbiter here. Any summary?
Well, somebody's going to litigate it. Somebody's going to litigate it. You're right. It'd be surprising if Google didn't want to, given how valuable all their YouTube content is, and a competitor, slurped it up to train their model. But somebody will litigate this. It could be these songwriters. Who knows? And then we're gonna get some messy arbitration around fair use, and it's probably going to work its way up over the different circuit courts. You'll probably get different judgments, and finally the Supreme Court will resolve it. And then we'll kind of know where things stand, and then there'll be a legislative fix. I don't know where it's going to end up. I mean, I know what JCal would say if he were here. I'm sure he's like chomping at the bit to be part of this conversation. He would say that creators deserve to get paid for their AI rights, and that if you want to make money training a model on their content, you got to compensate them. I buy your argument too, which is you're not really violating their rights for the AI model to read their content and analyze it, which is what it's really doing, as long as it doesn't output a violation of their copyright.
And that's what all artists do. That's what all humans do. The creative process is one of initially synthesis. You learn from other people's works, you learn from the environment around you, you learn from the world that you're exposed to.
But there was compensation in those other models.
There was not. You don't.
Of course
look,
there was.
Oasis never paid the Beatles to listen to their music. They
No,
bought
but
an
the
album.
radios, no, that's not true. They listened on the radio. They may not have paid, but some advertiser paid for an ad. The radio station had to pay ASCAP and BMI. There was publishing rights. There was all kinds of other rights. So that's not true what you're saying.
What I'm saying is it's not copyright just because I trained my
point is
process.
somebody got paid. So that singer-songwriter did get paid. They may not have gotten paid by the listener, but in this example, nobody's getting paid.
Look, I think there's three potential outcomes here, okay? Outcome number one is that Freeberg wins and the courts decide that this is fair use and these AI companies aren't in violation
And copyright
of rights.
infringement is measured in the work of art that is produced, not in the process by which it is generated.
Right. Okay. So that's solution number one. I think solution or outcome number two is that the courts throw a big wrench into it, or a bill like Schiff's bill, which is largely punitive, throws a big wrench into it. And I think what happens then is new AI companies have a really hard time accumulating training data. And so the incumbents who already have all the training data, they may have to pay a fine. There'll be some slap on the wrist. But now you've created a real moat and barrier to entry. And so secretly, they're going to love it. And it's going to be a big problem, I think, for the open source movement. So that's outcome number two. And then outcome number three is you create some sort of rights clearinghouse, kind of like exists in the recording industry, where if you want to cover somebody's song or perform somebody else's song, there's already predefined terms on which you can use those rights. And then there's a compensation mechanism for that. So you don't have to go negotiate every single deal that you want to do. You can just use the song, you can use the rights, and there's, again, compensation for that. That would be like the compromise. I could see that alternative number three existing, in which case the incumbents probably like that because they want there to be a barrier to entry. They want to make it hard for the guy in the garage to pony up the capital necessary to create a new model. But at least that would be a somewhat functional system. It wouldn't be outcome number two, which would totally put the kibosh on the use of training data. So in any event, I don't know which one of the three it's going to be, but those are the three potential outcomes that I see happening here.
Have you guys seen Udio, UDIO? No, it's like a new music Gen AI system. It is friggin' unbelievable.
Is that Vinod's thing or Vinod's another thing?
I think Vinode's another thing. This one just came out. It was apparently rumored for a while. Ex-DeepMind employees started Udio. It's been this kind of like hot stealth company for a couple of months. People have been talking about it as rumored to be the best music AI. But here is someone that said, Dune, the Broadway musical. And this is what it output. Go ahead.
Paul Atreides of Arakeen, the greatest leader we've ever seen. They say that he's the Listenel guy. Eyes bright blue and hair jet black. You should see him ride on a sandworm's back.
That's crazy.
You can hear the layers of music, the layers of the tracks, the smoothness, the tempo. Obviously, like there's just so many layers to this. Nick, can you pull up another one? Some of these are just incredible because it spans genres. It spans styles. It's like so beautiful, like the way it's put together. Every piece feels somewhat emotional. It's unique. It really doesn't feel like you're just listening to someone printing copyright music. Funky dance pop song. Create a birthday song for my friend Irvin. Create an Irish folk tune with violin and instrumental. it's pretty incredible. And I think it shows the state of the art is such now that this is going to become a real challenging question from a legislative point of view, given how far ahead these technologies have gotten. And I think that musicians, artists, consumers are going to start to use these tools in a really prolific way, given how good they are now. I heard from someone that just sat for hours creating tracks that they listened to on Udio the other day. And so you're basically just playing your own music all day long. It's really incredible. Anyway, exciting times.
Hopefully all the lawsuits and the legislators don't get in the way of all this innovation, because it's moving really fast and we should just kind of see where it goes before trying to clamp down on it.
Totally.
Mhm.